Jim, thank you very much. It's a huge privilege and a pleasure to be here and to talk about Prosperity Without Growth, which has been a sort of extraordinary process of launching a report. On the day, 2 days before it was launched, actually, I was walking home. It was about 7 o'clock at night, and I had a phone call. And I'm not going to relay too much of that phone call or tell you who it was from, except to perhaps relate that that person was rather irate to the extent that I had to hold the phone some distance from my ear. And the message that it conveyed to me was that number 10, and it was a street somewhere in London, with not again going to convey to you, had gone ballistic, which was really interesting. I mean, there were good reasons for number 10 to have gone ballistic, one of which was the unhappy accident we'd managed to launch Prosperity Without Growth in the week that number 10 had invited the G20 leaders to London to talk about the process of kick-starting growth. And obviously, as an advisor to the UK government, it could have been seen as bad form to launch this report in this week. Indeed, it was seen as very bad form. And the most extraordinary thing that happened on the back of it was that virtually nothing. 2 days later, on launch date, almost nothing happened. There was a resounding silence and still some resonant antagonism to what was seen as sort of sidelining a major political process. And yet in the interim, the kind of process of as Jim described, of sort of downloads and the taking of the message into different arena, including in about a month's time the UN. Anyone who has any tips on how I should relay this to the UN, please do come forward. I would be fascinated to hear them. Not something I'm approaching without trepidation, I have to say. It's been quite extraordinary in a way that the message has been so much taken up. And I think one of the reasons is that behind all the words, behind all the hype, behind all the complexity, behind the economic system, behind the economic collapse, behind our soul-searching about the future, lies a very, very simple conceptual truth, that an exponentially expanding subsystem of a finite system at some point has to hit the buffers. It has contained within it the seeds of its own collapse. It is not something that is physically possible. It's a conceptualization of the problem that even school children can understand with alacrity, this idea that we're living inside of a system that is exponentially expanding and that foresees its own future as exponentially expanding, and yet attempts to remain within ecological limits, is one that is readily graspable. And of course it is much more complex than that, and I'll talk about how it's much more complex than that. But at its heart, it's something that people do kind of understand. They almost have an innate sense that the spirit of a rampant consumerism on which we've built a decade and a half of actually quite good economic growth is not something that can go on in the way that the model predicts it will go on. And they also have, I think one of the things I've come across a lot is a sense of, and I'll come back to this, a sort of sense of discontent, a latent discontent, a sense that actually another world is possible, to use language that doesn't necessarily, again, live in the mainstream. And that brings me, in a way, to my picture. I still don't know quite why this chair is here. It's something perhaps awaiting me to sit in quieter days and think about the plays that I haven't actually written over the last 2 years because I've been quite busy in this. But this idea, it captures for me a sort of visual image of a simplicity that actually is at the heart of people's yearnings for what the good life should be about. And again, there are many, many complications around that image. But the idea that we could live better by consuming less is one that, in the context of global ecological limits, is not one, perhaps, that we should give up lightly. The picture also, I finally discovered this morning, has another interesting feature, which is that it looks like someone's about to come and sit in it. And I was giving a presentation which was on video conferencing, actually with Scotland, Wales and London involved. And the fourth picture was this picture here. And actually, it was very difficult to get the meeting started because everyone was assuming that someone hadn't arrived yet and was going to be coming to listen from, I don't know, Greece or somewhere. It's not an expectation of arrival. It's just the visual image that I happened to pick up at some point and haven't quite let go of. Prosperity Without Growth, the idea of it has been the theme I should really have left that a little bit longer because somewhere along the line of my beautiful chair, some logos got inserted there, and I just want to make sure that you've seen those. Many, many thanks to Queen's University Law School and to the Sustainable Development Commission. I'm not averse, of course, to logos, and there is, as you see, a little bit of advertising around the Earth Scan book. I'll come back again to that later. But the basic idea of prosperity without growth is to pitch that idea of unsustainability in the seeds, in the structure, in the foundations of the way that we live. And actually, very few people now would disagree with what I see as one horn in a very profound dilemma, the idea that growth is unsustainable. And of course, there are lots of people who will say, actually, well, it's unsustainable at the moment, but we could have a different form of growth. We could have a materially light growth. We could have a low carbon growth. We could have an economy that increasingly divorces itself from its own material implications. And that's something that is very, very important to consider. I'll come back to it. But nobody seriously disagrees with the fact that economic activity, as we know it at the moment, at the global level, is deeply unsustainable. It's depleting resources too fast, it's emitting carbon and greenhouse gases too fast, it's degrading land too fast, it's ruining biodiversity, water supplies and water quality are being degraded, and all of those challenges, immense challenges for governance, have come to haunt us in some sense, in spite of the fact that actually, at this point in time, we probably have to admit we don't know exactly how to make the economy work in its own terms either. So in other words, there's a kind of sense there of an impending, if not already existing, mess. And yet, so you would ask yourself, well, in the face of that, why don't we do anything different? And here's the other horn of the dilemma, and it is really, it's been encapsulated in the term, the possible alternatives have been encapsulated in the term degrowth. It's something that's come actually specifically out of France as an idea, and Serge Latouche, the notions of Serge Latouche, where it is called, in much more colourful and savoury terms, décroissance. Décroissance, s'il vous plaît. It certainly sounds as though it's something that you might want for breakfast. And interestingly, there's a battle over the words at the moment, which I can't quite understand, because degrowth, for me, is a very clunky sort of word, whereas décroissance certainly has a sort of sense of going somewhere to it and progress around it. But then that's the continual battle of the dominance of the English language, for which I can't really be an apologist. So I'll move on swiftly from that. But if you have a chance, promote décroissance, because it definitely sounds better to me. But décroissance may sound lovely, but it is degrowth by another name. And the other part of the fundamental dilemma of growth is this, that degrowth is unstable. And we see that no more profoundly than in the current climate, where once the economy starts to falter, the fear around economic collapse, and on the back of economic collapse, social collapse, really bites. It really serves to concentrate the political mind, the business mind, and indeed the minds of ordinary people who will find themselves possibly out of a job, out of a home, and possibly in situations where social structure itself is under threat. And there is good evidence to show that when economies collapse, if collapse is the inevitable outcome, bad things happen. And some of that evidence is convened in the report. I'm not going to go over it now.